great pleasure to introduce Scott Replogle, who is a physician and a skeptic. And as usual, please speak up. Scott, you don't need to speak up quite as loudly because the microphone's near to you.
Do you want me to sit and talk?
Your choice.
I'll try it that way.
Okay. And without further ado, Scott, you're up.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to go into this today. Several of us thought it would be a good idea to get more specific or expand on the topic of conspiracies in relation to the topic of science that I presented some time ago. I also presented on authoritarianism in the past, and there's a little bit of relation to that too. So I'm going to kind of go over what I see as the philosophy or the background of libertarians and conspiracy theories, and I think hopefully you'll feel like you understand where I'm coming from or where conspiracy theories fit in. The interesting thing from my standpoint was that when I became sort of libertarian thinking and then joined groups and met other libertarians and so on, I was surprised that some of them were into conspiracy theories because I didn't think it went with that. So I have subsequently found that they're sort of unrelated. You can be a libertarian and you can be into conspiracy theories or not. The two don't necessarily go together, and I'll try to show that. Next. So I'm really a skeptical libertarian, but not, and there's a long background. We could give a whole talk sometime on skepticism, but that's really where I'm coming from. Next. So just briefly, I went over this before. Most people are authoritarians. I figure about 85% of people are authoritarians, and they generally require an authority for what they believe in. In other words, they can't think for themselves. They can't think how individuals can operate together and look like a society or a sector of the economy or something like that. They need someone to be an authority for them, and it can be a religious authority or a secular authority. They're generally not able to say, I don't know, and they tend to need to engage in confirmation bias and in teleological thinking, which Linda brought up to me, what I call protocol thinking, which means don't think for yourself, just do what we tell you to do. And I see that in medicine all the time in hospitals. We have a protocol. Don't think, don't do it on your own thinking, just do what we say. Next. So libertarians are not usually authoritarians, but they aren't all skeptics or free of conspiracy thinking, but they do tend to suspect government. Libertarians, like most people, often desire to blame someone or make someone responsible for events. In other words, there's got to be a reason for that. And libertarians generally don't want to be fooled or duped. They want to think for themselves, but do tend to be suspicious of government or authorities.
Can you put the slide back up, please, Ralph? Thank you.
And as I mentioned, libertarians are not immune from confirmation bias, which is big in skeptical thinking. Next. I ran across this recently, and I really like Thomas Sowell. I've read everything he's written, but this kind of pulled it out for me. People, if you can't read it from back there, the reason so many people misunderstand so many issues is not that these issues are so complex, but that people do not want a factual or analytical explanation that leaves them emotionally unsatisfied. In other words, emotional satisfaction and belief is more important than analytical, or rational. Next.
Whoops.
So I found that most people don't really understand science or how scientific understanding works, and they think of it as if science is a thing that you have or you don't have, rather than a method of understanding things and comes in gradations of degree of understanding. So for most people, understanding or the facts are based on their beliefs rather than rational reasoning, testing, and evidence. Authoritarians tend to go with the story or explanation of someone they believe in and view them as an authority unless they go against their underlying worldview. Next. So there's, you can always find something like this to go with your talks. Next. So the need for an explanation is what's behind people that tend to go with conspiracy theories. An explanation that doesn't fit their belief is not acceptable, because they're not really looking at rational arguments, they're just looking at whether it fits their underlying beliefs. They are unwilling to say, I don't know, or let's wait until we get more data or more information. And belief is not based on rational thinking or open to change by argument or evidence, which is like political beliefs fall in that category. So things like magic and superstition tend to be big with people who are going on their beliefs. Next. I thought this was a pretty good one too. I don't know if you can read that, but there's been several in the past history of science. There's been a lot of so-called settled science that turned out to be not so settled. But to people that need to believe in something that fits their ideology, they think of it as settled science. Next. Now, it's important, I think, that you can break down the idea of conspiracy theory into different categories that aren't necessarily the same. In other words, something that someone believes in isn't necessarily what most people would call a conspiracy theory. Ideological, political thinking is one. Religious is another. Pseudoscience we'll talk more about. Then there's real crackpot ideas, which I'll mention a few of, and real conspiracy theories, which are something was caused by a specific group of people acting together in a conspiracy, not some broad, diffuse fear. And then false flag is another term for that type of thing. Next. So two types of conspiracy: the broad type, big pharma. You always hear about big business or Wall Street, or the Illuminati is another example that's been used. And then there are what I would consider specific conspiracy theories, and things like the assassination of JFK or 9/11 being caused by a specific group of people, not what most people thought, is what I'm considering a conspiracy theory. So next. This is another, I looked up conspiracy theories online, and, oh, wait, I think you skipped ahead. Did we miss one? Yeah. I thought this was a pretty good definition. A secret plan by a group to do something unlawful or harmful, or the action of plotting or conspiring, rather than some diffuse global sort of thing. Next.
Wait a minute. It needs to be a group. It can't be two people. It can't be one person.
One person would not be a conspiracy.
Two people.
Yeah.
Two people can conspire.
Yes.
So it doesn't have to be a group. It can be two
Right.
or more.
Two people could still be in my definition, could still be a conspiracy. Next. There's some other words that I find kind of relate to this, and I'm not going to go into this in detail, but you've heard the term fake news thrown around these days, and someone's lying and so on, or this caused that or something. These are terms that are often misused and aren't pinned down in terms of what they're really talking about. For example, lying means someone knows that it's not true, but they're saying it anyway as if it's true. But most of the time, people are saying things they believe in, so they're not really lying, but that's how they're viewed. And fake is usually an example of blind confirmation bias rather than actively trying to fake something. Next. So, in the broad-based category, I have things like global warming caused by humans, anti-vaccination, anti-GMO, anti-fracking, and fluoridation. Those are what I would consider broad category conspiracy theory, not specific conspiracies. Next. Linda will go into this some more. Religious conspiracy thinking, lots of that. The big one I always dealt with was the people who couldn't accept that evolution could happen by individual survival of the fittest and must be run, evolutionary progress must be run by God or an intelligent designer. To me, that's a type of conspiracy thinking, but not the specific type. Next. What do we got? Pseudoscience. The skeptics were real big into this. Most of the things that I've listed here have no real science behind them, but plenty of people believe in them, and it's very difficult to convince them otherwise. So that falls into the category of pseudoscience within conspiracy thinking.
Scott?
Yeah.
Would you put astrology into one of these categories?
Yeah,
Which
that
one?
would be pseudoscience.
Okay.
See, pseudoscience is things that use the language of science or try to make it look like they're scientific, but they don't really have the scientific basis or backing of them.
Go ahead.
Okay? Go ahead. Some of these, to me, are just plain crackpot theories. Like anybody who believes in a flat Earth, to me, is a crackpot. There's zero basis for that. I mean, it's not even remotely feasible to think that way today. But other examples are Bigfoot, or that the moon landing was fake. That's another one that, to me, just doesn't even get on the scale. Next. And here's a list of some what I consider conspiracy theories, and some of them are fairly broad, like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, but some of them are fairly specific. 9/11 was actually a conspiracy by the people that carried it out and their supporters. But the conspiracy theory is, no, it was done by government, and they were just making it look like it was done by the Arabs. Next. So, as you know, I'm into music, and I ran into this one recently. Anybody remember?
That would be the blind guy.
Stevie Wonder.
Very
Stevie
good.
Wonder.
Next. Superstition ain't the way. So I will entertain questions further about my part, but I'm going to have Linda go next here with some more specifics.
Are we allowed to ask you our questions?
Oh, okay. You want me to take
Yeah,
a...
take 5 minutes worth of questions, and then go to Linda, and then we'll have a general. Go ahead,
Okay,
Drew.
yeah.
climate change.
Right.
Tell me the conspiracy there.
That's not a conspiracy in the sense that I'm describing, but it's related to it. And the reason is that the people who believe in it, the ideologues, what I call warmists, they really believe it. But it's not based on actual science. The science of global climate is very primitive.
It isn't based on?
They try to claim that it's based on
But
science.
could you specifically tell me the science it isn't based on?
Because we don't know all the factors involved in climate change, how they interact at different levels
We don't know
relative
the
to
molecules.
each other, how they operate at different levels of the Earth, and we don't know what's going to happen to many of these factors. So it's a myth, really, to think that we do understand how global climate works and what it's going to do, and that growing government to make you do this and that is going to control the climate. That's just ideological myth thinking.
So CO2 and methane are not.
No,
not
what
involved.
they're going on, there is some science to it.
Okay, that's
But
what I'm
it's-
asking you
yeah.
to explain what isn't there.
It's
that
very
makes this a conspiracy.
simplistic. It's based on how one or two chemicals behave in a simple closed environment like a terrarium. Yes, CO2 can act as a greenhouse gas in a simple situation where there's no other factors involved.
Such as on Venus or other.
No,
other planets or
they're
other
complex.
planets.
They're complex too. We don't know
But they
all the
are
factors
complex,
there.
and
Oh
that's what
yeah.
I'm asking you to
Yeah.
sort of define for us so that we can differentiate. And
Okay.
maybe I should get to the bottom line that concerns me about this, is that even if we're not responsible for it, if it's not anthropomorphic, or, is that the right word?
Yeah.
Anthropogenic.
Anthropogenic.
I think that's the right
Yeah, yeah.
word. Even if we didn't cause it, we are aware of it, aren't we? And we're aware of it in terms of changing our environment sufficiently that it may involve our extinction. Should we not anticipate that there's a potential for that and react to it even if we didn't cause it, or should we just wait and see?
Well, that's a multi-layered
It
answer.
is, and I'm
We
just
don't.
trying to get to the bottom line quickly.
It's possible that human activity, in terms of CO2 or other greenhouse gases, are contributing to global climate.
Right.
But the Earth has warmed in the past when humans clearly had nothing to do with it.
Right, and we have ice core records of that. We have
Yeah,
science that
right.
tells us the time frames
Right.
of those, and compared with the
Right.
time frames now, and the trend, and we have a lot of
Yeah.
data points for a trend, don't we?
No, not
We
as
don't.
much as you'd think.
We
That's a
don't.
long
No.
Since the
discussion.
19th century, we
The,
don't.
the theories and the calculations and the models that have been done have not been successful. Now, normally in science that means, well, we must have it wrong, we got to adjust our model or our thinking.
Okay.
But in the case of ideologues, they're not going to change their model or their thinking about anything because it's based on belief, not based on science. And it's very difficult, for example, to run an experiment on global climate and say, okay, if it works this way and I do this, let's see how it comes out. You can't really do that.
So you think that the IPCC is corrupt? That they have a political agenda or an economic agenda?
Well, I wouldn't use the word corrupt, but they're ideologically based.
But relative to what? What motivation? Are they all, these are mostly PhDs, are these the people that you would presume are fitting your model of locking onto a belief system, even though they say they're scientists and they've
Right.
gotten PhDs in science, and they value ostensibly the scientific model? You're saying that they're still true believers that lock onto an idea and won't let go of it.
Yeah, and in
Okay.
this case, it would be fine if they believe that, but they want to use that supposed knowledge to grow government, to have government be global and more powerful and control what you can do and what you can't do.
So when you get them behind closed doors, they're big government
Yeah,
conspiracy.
that's their whole thing behind it. Now
Keegan, I'm sorry, let's get Keegan in
Okay.
and Bill in, and then we're gonna go
Okay.
to Linda.
All right, thanks.
I actually saw a really interesting video online. It's about interviewing, I guess.
Keegan, could you get the microphone closer to you or
Yes.
speak up?
So I was watching an interesting video online about a guy interviewing Patrick Moore. I guess he was one of the founders of Greenpeace, or well, not founders, early member. Anyway, how he was saying, just kind of debunking climate change. And I mean, he said a number of things, but one of the things that so like what you're saying about like why like IPC or whatever that they would not give the accurate facts, and I think that they're the money that funds them is government money, so I mean it's in their interest to support this and keep studying it.
Follow the line.
Yeah, so I mean, so if like
Those paychecks.
it might be a factor. I mean, I can't say that's the only thing.
And,
But.
and they would override the interests of the entire globe for a paycheck or a grant.
Possibly, I
They're
don't know for sure.
unethical people, broadly speaking, that those scientists are just unethical people and selfishly pursuing
It's
paychecks.
hard to get a man to understand something if his paycheck depends on his not understanding it.
And that was well said, who said that? I think-
Lincoln.
Sinclair Lewis?
Sinclair Lewis
Or Upton Sinclair? I
Upton
can use
Sinclair.
those
You
two.
got it.
Upton
You got it.
Sinclair.
Yes.
Interestingly, these same people that use science as an authority, science is settled, they're often against things like vaccinations or GMOs or things like this, where the science is actually quite robust. It's quite well developed, evolutionary biology and so on, but to them, then they just dismiss it.
And
because
that's why
it's
I'm
not
asking
really
you to be
science-based.
Specific, Scott, if you
Yeah.
could, in giving us a little bit of data in terms of how you've drawn your conclusions here. Though some of them I certainly agree with. I'm an
Well, let's-
anti-conspiracy type person, which is why I'm
Yeah.
a little reluctant to see conspiracies where I don't seem to have
Well,
evidence.
yeah,
for it.
again, I don't view it as a conspiracy where a few people got together and said, we're going to do this. It's a little different when it comes to broad categories like this. But I'll maybe be able to speak some more about that at the end because we want to get on to Linda.
We want to get to Bill and then Linda.
Okay.
All right. To see the behavior of how they treated Roger Pilkey,
What behavior was that?
the ideologically driven climate science. So Roger Pilkey is a local scientist, and he gave a great talk here of his
Is he with
experience.
INPAR or
He was
NIST
here.
or-
He's a statistician. He was involved with the IPCC,
Okay.
and he gave a great talk here. I don't remember when. You can find it on the YouTube list. Where his statistics with an IPCC committee, where he thought he was going to have a minority and majority report based on, are storms getting worse? Is there getting to be more damage? And they ended up in his committee within the IPCC looking at the statistics, the amount of damage, the severity of the storms. The conclusion was there was no evidence that the severity of the storms had gotten worse over the period of time where the climate change was the warming was supposed to be occurring. That these storms, the fact that the damages have increased was just because there's more people living in susceptible areas. And they ended up with actually a unanimous report to that effect to the IPCC. And he gave a great talk about how he had been demonized and forced from his being able to be an author at 5280. And in fact, that our invitation to talk to us was his first invitation since he came out with that report. So you do lose your career, you do lose your ability, your funding, and you do lose the ability to communicate to the masses when you go against the
Conspiracy.
prevailing thing. And the conspiracy portion of it, he did find out how the various people went directly to his, the people that were hiring him to write articles and stuff and make sure that he was blackballed. So there was a conspiracy. It was a conspiracy to keep his science perspective from being made public. So that little slice of behavior, to me, says that yes, there is something going on that is more ideologically driven than science driven in the world of climate change.
Of tribalism.
Yeah, and are the people that came to his talk, two of them were retired in-car scientists, and they were happy to support everything he said because they were retired.
Yeah.
They did let us know that they would be risking their
Nothing to
jobs
lose.
if they actually said those sorts of things and they weren't retired. So anyway, so there's, for me, that says that calling it a conspiracy, which means that I'm a conspiracy theorist because I think there was a conspiracy between the ideologues and the people that hired him to write for 5280 and the people that made sure he got grants. They did work together to do something that I would think would be illegal. So I'm a conspiracy theorist. That's an example of a conspiracy that I believe in, but it doesn't. I don't quite fit in with Scott's definition of a conspiracy theorist. But
It's,
there we go.
it's related, but yeah.
Well, it's
Okay,
good that they're different conspiracies.
I'm going to cut off. I'm going to cut things off and let. Poor Linda has about 50 slides she has to go through in a short amount of
She can
time.
do it though.
Oh,
Okay.
got my running shoes. I didn't know much about conspiracy theories. Scott picked this title, but I have run across conspiracy theorists a lot in combating quackery. But I enjoyed very much preparing for this because I found out a whole lot of stuff, how vast the array of conspiracy theory are in the world. How do I tell you? Next.
That's the word
Okay.
you use.
I had no idea that the Israelis were using animals to spy on Hamas. And Malala, she was actually shot by Robert De Niro, disguised as a Ubac homeopath.
Everybody knows that.
Everybody knows that? I didn't know this. Okay, and the Pope is the Antichrist. I had no idea. Did you guys know this?
Yes.
Oh, I've got
You
a
didn't?
completely different one.
See, I thought he was the whore of Babylon. You know, you'd think I never went to Sunday school.
There's other
Next.
ones.
Whoop. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, you skipped one.
Did I?
Yeah. My favorite conspiracy theory.
That's the next slide.
It is?
Yes.
Oh, you do the next one then. What was
The
it?
cartoon?
The cartoon, yes. Yeah, my favorite conspiracy theory. September 1932, a dank basement in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, one of the greatest conspiracies of all time,
Yes.
formed. Yes.
There's
What?
evidence.
What did we have in Wisconsin? I'm from Wisconsin. What did we do with these extra hot dogs? The hot dish was invented, and there's proof of harm in conspiracy theories. Next, please. I guess I want to go back one. Yeah.
Go back.
Okay. Scott made a lot of these points, but again, these conspiracies are usually large groups with a sinister intent, and almost everything has a conspiracy, and I'll show that later. Next, please.
I think all human action is
Okay. One of the points I'll just make here, conspiracy theorists look for the anomalous and build around it instead of saying, is it likely that you'll have any event or phenomenon that doesn't have an anomalous or several anonymous things connected to it, like the umbrella man standing near the assassination of JFK. You know, it was sunny, why has this guy got an umbrella? Well, there were reasons. Next, please. Okay, a number of these things Scott has mentioned. I'll just go to the bottom at teleological thinking. It's the belief that everything happens for a reason. And the recent studies have made a correlation that a lot of conspiracy theorists are creationists. And certainly if you believe in creation, you believe biblical creation, you think things really do happen for a reason. And they collect a lot of conspiracy theories. Next, please. Okay. I'll add some other reasons why conspiracy theories are attractive. You get the fun of kind of this secret knowledge, investigating a mystery and knowing what other people don't know, and the opportunity to fight evil. Okay, next please. But in everything that I was looking at, it seems that the psychology of conspiracy theory does not have any robust kind of research behind it. It's so very...
Is there a Jerome Kirkpatrick back here?
Yeah.
Hi, there's a lady on the phone trying to get in touch with you.
Oh, okay.
Huh?
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Somebody's trying to get rid of him.
Yeah.
And as we know, the study of psychology is not rocket science. It's a lot harder to do. Next, please. I think one of the major problems that we have is that scientists are poor communicators, and we leave the public feeling very unsatisfied when we explain things. We talk about the preponderance of evidence, and the most definite we can get is if it has robust evidence behind it. So it sounds like the scientist may be trying to waffle, or he has something to hide. Whereas leaders of conspiracy theories are so definite, they're so convincing, they know for sure what's happening. My daughter and I went to see Andrew Wakefield in Denver a few years ago. We know all about Wakefield studies and whatnot, totally unconvinced by it. But this guy is mesmerizing, and then throw in that mellow English accent, and we felt like we had been seduced practically. Next, please. Again, it's a global phenomenon. Every country, everywhere, they have conspiracy theories. Somebody claims, and I don't know anything about this, but claims that 4/5 of Arabs feel that there were no Arabs involved in the 9/11 incident. Okay, next please. I ran into a conspiracy theory when I lived in South America, and this is a really old one, dating back to the days of the conquistadors. There's the belief that foreigners with beards like to kill Indians for their fat, and they use it for various reasons. And actually there's some basis for this. The chroniclers have some evidence that the conquistadors used human fat to treat wounds and perhaps syphilis, although that's another contested idea about where syphilis came from. Then down through the years, the human fat was used for different things, to oil guns, to start jet engines, and even for cosmetics. Okay, and of course the government is denying that this has any basis, that they don't believe that the population is at risk, and that has just fueled the whole thing to a fever pitch.
Where could I donate some human fat?
Yeah, the liposuction people should realize they're sitting on a fortune there. Next slide, please. And when I worked in South America at the Schweitzer Hospital there, we came right up against this conspiracy theory. There was a mysterious disease along one of the tributaries that was killing off a lot of the young adults, and they flew in one young man to the hospital to see if we could figure out what was going on. We couldn't stop his bleeding, and he died, and we knew that we really should get some tissue samples and send them off to Germany to find out what was happening. But we couldn't, he had no family there to give us permission to do the autopsy. And if we do this, and send him back with all the cuts and things, that it was very likely that they were going to think that there were a bunch of fat vampires working at this hospital. So we were really concerned that this might even close down the hospital. But we went ahead with it and never found out what was the matter. And hospital survived. Next, please. This is for Bill. The term conspiracy theory, is it a derogatory term? There is a conspiracy theory that the CIA invented the term conspiracy theory in the 60s, but people have traced the term back to the 1890s, and apparently at this asylum for the criminally insane called Broadmoor in the UK, there was the theory that insane non-criminals were being imprisoned in this place, people that the government wanted to get out of the way. It was used in the 1960s, but people actually follow the popularity of terms, and they claim that in 1997 the term conspiracy theorist just exploded with these two films. And note that Hollywood is on the side of the conspiracy theorists. They are the heroes. And then you had the X-Files and whatnot. And the terms for the people who doubt the conspiracies they get some nasty terms too. We are the sheeple, the dupes, the brainwashed. Next, please. And by the way, I ran across this. This is a picture of the real Men in Black.
Oh, nice.
Next. Someone did a study to see if any particular political persuasion was more susceptible to conspiracy thinking, and apparently not by this one study. Next, please. So I started out trying to find out what was the most implausible conspiracy theory on Earth. And I found it. I'm pretty sure I found it. Richard Nixon back in 1978 said he was going to have some surveillance drones that were going, and he was going to call them birds. Well, somebody took him seriously at his word there. And these people believe that by 2001, all birds have been replaced by drones. And watch out if you ordered chicken today. Okay? What are you eating?
Nice.
I didn't believe they were serious, but by the huge tracks, to justify this belief, they're serious. And they have 20 chapters in various states and the UK. Next, please. This one's pretty good too. This one, this claims that aliens are disguising themselves as animated characters. I guess they morph into two dimensional creatures or something. Next, please. And of course, we've got the reptilian overlords. Next, please. And here's the proof for them. They've been with us for a long time. You can see tongues and sort of watch out for people with kind of lumpy cheeks and things like that. And I looked to see if the queen had that discoloration on any other photo. I can't find another photo that has that. Next, please. Oh, and poor Benedict Cumberbatch. You know, he's got these reptilian slanty slit pupils, and Bob Hope. Oh, he's definitely got it.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Next, please. And we know where some of them live, right? At DIA. Next, please. DIA did some construction work this summer, and they put up some signs admitting that they're building an Illuminati headquarters and remodeling the lizard people's underlair, you know, and it's sort of a UN of oddities here, aliens, Illuminati lizard people. Next, please. And Nazis, apparently. The actual layout of the runways is over there on the left. Would you agree with that? Our aeronautical engineer and aviator par excellence here. Okay.
Obvious swastika.
Obvious. Okay, and Colorado is the global headquarters. Oh God, can't say global headquarters. They are the headquarters, or the headquarters of the flat Earth people. And in a couple of weeks here, they're going to have their international conference in Denver that you can listen to live on YouTube. Okay, next, please. One of my favorite conspiracy theories that I ran into is the belief that NASA invented the flat earthers so that any other conspiracy theory about NASA would look stupid. So this conference they're going to have in a couple of weeks in Denver, all actors hired by NASA.
Oh, nice.
Yes, okay. And, oh God, these poor kids. What do you suppose that yellow sort of stuff is on the night side of the Earth? I don't know.
Ebola.
Next, please.
There you go. Thank you. Can I take his bowl?
And next time you have a lunar eclipse, look out for this. Next, please. Okay. We're missing some stuff there. It's, is the government trying to kill us? And a lot of times you find libertarians sort of having a knee-jerk distrust of government doing anything, and that includes some things that have some sound science behind them. It's kind of mangled, but there's vaccines, chemtrails, and fluoridation seems to be sort of a trinity of conspiracy theories that you find going together, and that's a film about them, The Great Culling, which claims that an unnamed elite is trying to poison off, kill off 90% of the world's population in preparation for the second coming. So, next, please. Part of this is chemtrails, one of those huge thing that conspiracies that would involve multiple governments and hundreds of thousands of people, but the belief here is that governments are trying to test out chemical and biological agents on the population, or trying to modify climate. Any other conspiracies you come across, Drew, on that?
Tranquilizers.
Pacify. That's pacify the population. Okay.
And what Drew said was tranquilizers for people who might be listening at home.
Okay.
And
Next.
they're wanting to squash our own, yes, we get those libertarians tamped down.
Next, please. GMOs is kind of coming into this trinity of things, and there are a lot of conspiracy theories about the FDA suppressing information about how dangerous they are. Libertarians mainly seem to be entering this particular issue from on the issue of labeling. I think people should be not forced to label items as GMO or non-GMO. Next, please. Okay, then I'll end up with talking about fluoridation. This is an issue that I know a lot about. I've been involved in at least five community ballot issues that sought to get rid of fluoridation. And that was in Fort Collins in 2006, in Boulder here, and more recently in Denver. Next, please. Fluoridation started in 1945 in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the John Birchers started out right away with claiming this was another plot to pacify the population so that there would be a common takeover. And actually, right now, the anti-fluoridationists claim that fluoride was used by the Nazis to pacify the Jews during World War II. PolitiFact did a study on this and gave that claim a pants on fire rating. Next, please. Oh, there it is. Next, please. Okay, the internet is just full of anti-fluoridation stuff. There's some 120 documentaries on YouTube versus about 3 pro-fluoride things that claim that fluoride is incredibly poisonous, that one of the additives is actually an older one. Sodium fluoride is used as a rat poison. Well, it is, but we know that its dose makes the poison. Next, please. Just like warfarin is an anticoagulant, but also a rat poison. All things are poison. Dose makes a poison. We knew that for the last 500 years. There's Paracelsus, the father of toxicology. Next, please. The conspiracy theories regarding fluoridation is that it's mass medication by the government, or the government's allowing the fertilizer industry to dump fluorosilicic acid in our water, plot to depopulate the world, or just to kill off the black population, or it's a plot by the American Dental Association to weaken teeth so to give dentists more business. And all these opponents claim there's no safe level of fluoride at all. Next, please. The harm that's coming from all these conspiracy theories is that there's 25% of communities that are not being fluoridated that could actually use this use fluoridation. And in the last 5 years, 73 communities have voted out fluoride from their water, largely based on all the fear-mongering that surrounds it. People are being needlessly scared into using bottled water without fluoride, and to use a lot of different kinds of quack detoxification schemes. Thanks. That's next. Okay, and why does this matter? Because a lot of times people don't realize that the #1 disease in the country is dental decay. It affects a lot of us. It's very expensive to get dental repair, and dental insurance hardly seems like dental insurance at all if you have it. Next, please. The benefits of fluoridation. Fluoride is an actual mineral nutrient in trace amounts. Ingested versus any other type of fluoride. Ingested, it gets into your saliva and will continually remineralize your teeth. And that counteracts the acids in your mouth, which are constantly wearing away the enamel. It's uniquely effective because, like, toothpaste will give you 2 hours of protection. Fluoride will work all around the clock. So it prevents, over the benefit of other things, an additional 20 to 40% of cavities. And it's really inexpensive. Fluoridating water is just pennies per month per person. And it increases dramatically your chances of keeping your natural teeth for a lifetime. And a 2003 study showed that every $1 towards fluoridation saves $61 in dental bills per person. And that's probably a lot more these days. The issue usually comes down to fluoride safety. Fluoride at 1 part per million, which is what fluoridation usually aims for, is considered a mineral nutrient that strengthens teeth and bones. The fluorosilicic acid that is added to water is double checked for purity, and when it's added just a tiny bit to water, it breaks down into water, silica, a little bit of sand, and fluoride ions. A lot of the conspiracy theorists say, well, they're not natural ions, fluoride ions, but a fluoride ion is a fluoride ion. Now, there's a wide margin of safety. It's at that level, it's really impossible to overdose on it. And it has robust scientific evidence behind it. There have been 5 independent systematic reviews done, and the systematic review is the gold measure in science. Next, please. It is possible to have too much fluoride, and these poor people in India and China and some parts of the southern United States have huge amounts of fluoride in their water, which is too bad because it's very expensive to remove, and it causes damage to bones and teeth. Next, please. Mostly what you'll see in America is that the anti-fluoridationists will point out is, oh, you get these white spots on your teeth. Well, this is a mild form of the dental fluorosis. You can usually only see it when the teeth are dry, and it indicates not damage, but that the teeth are especially strong and resistant to decay. So if you see anybody with these little white spots on them, ask them how many cavities they have. Chances are they will be cavity-free. But the anti-fluoridationists make a big deal about this as being ruining, aesthetically unpleasing, and causing people to have all sorts of aesthetic repairs done. Next, please. Okay, the bottom line for libertarians, they will say, you present them with all this information, and they still don't want government deciding what chemicals to put in drinking water. Well, they already do put a whole lot of other chemicals in water. Just look up water purification on Wikipedia sometime to see what goes into water. And this has been tested in courts numerous times, and this is a typical finding by a court. While forced fluoridation does, to a limited extent, infringe upon the individual's freedom to decide whether he will or will not ingest fluoride, such an infringement, absent any significant adverse consequences to the individual, cannot be accorded substantial weight. And it's a matter of public health here. City dwellers really can't have their own private well or their private sewer system. It's impossible to deliver designer water to homes. So it's a matter of the community, and libertarians kind of taking on this issue of, if we're going to have community water, should we be deciding that it should be prepared and treated by the best science around? Okay, and I think there was one more.
Okay.
Okay. I like this quote by an ethicist from Manchester University. We should ask not, are we entitled to impose fluoridation on unwilling people, but are the unwilling people entitled to impose the risk, damage, and costs of the failure to fluoridate on the community at large? When we compare the freedoms at stake, the most crucial is surely the one which involves liberation from pain and disease. And with that, I'll let him have the last word.
Let me just say, I thought that was a wonderful presentation of the details, particularly getting into fluoridation. and the argument there, as you didn't quite get to, but it's the same one for vaccination in terms of the government imposing being vaccinated for certain diseases.
Yes, and it encapsulates the notion of public health.
Right.
Which are services for the community that the individual cannot do for himself.
And one other thing that I learned or thought of, I am certainly one of those who's very suspicious, if you want to use that term, of government, but it's not really because I think it's a government conspiracy. It's because government is not capable of doing things well, and particularly not hiding conspiracies. That's why 9/11 couldn't be an inside job, because they couldn't have hidden it. Government's not capable of doing that. So I'm suspicious of government, but for a little different reason.
Okay, let's take a list of questions. We're going to go around this way, so it's going to be Keegan, then Blake, then Bill, then Maris. Okay, Keegan, you're up.
Oh, I don't actually so much have a question, but just sort of anything I found out recently is just about how putting the fluoride in the water is like medicating the population or something. Actually, just recently, Vox came out with an article promoting putting antidepressants in the drinking water. It's just like,
Precisely what fluoridation is, it's the adjustment of fluoride, which is in all groundwater. It's adjustment up or down to get an optimal amount.
yeah, I mean, obviously, there's nothing wrong
Yeah,
with fluoride, but it's
right.
like you have like sort of a mainstream media outlet promoting actually medicating the water. And it's like, no,
But
don't do that.
the reason that that doesn't hold, though, is because the science isn't there. There isn't the scientific basis or background for medication like that as there is for.
Yeah, that's just, I mean, obviously there's not. I'm just saying it's just bizarre that they're actually coming out and suggesting that's a good idea.
Right. That's why it's so hypocritical to me to see people on the global warming thing say that science, the science is settled, science knows everything. But then when it comes to other areas, the science can be completely irrelevant to them because it doesn't fit their beliefs.
That's
Blake, you're up.
Okay, so a couple of things. A request, I'd like to have that slide from the Atlas Society, the one towards the beginning of your talk.
Oh, the one, Thomas Sowell?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, I'd like
Okay.
to have that, or
Okay.
where I can get it.
yeah.
And I want to weigh in on the global warming conversation we had earlier. But before I do that, I want to know if you feel there are such a things as benign conspiracies. And let me explain what I mean by that. So global warming, I think there's some well-meaning people, or perhaps not, but they see something happening and they're very concerned. And so for me, what happens, and I want to see if you agree, is conspiracies will motivate action. So these people that are scientists who say, yes, we see this, it may not be that big a deal, but what harm is it in getting people excited so they change their behavior? Okay?
It's like
So-
religious, that's like religious teaching.
Very good. So for me, and I've been an ecology freak since I was in my teens, okay? But I look every day for what can I do to make sure I do my best to protect the planet. In fact, I'm driving up here, I was just thinking about this. When I meet the man at the gate, when I pass, then I'll be able to say, well, I did what I could. So I'm blameless. Anyway. So I'd like to have your feeling about benign conspiracies that happen
Yeah.
out of chaos.
Well, in science, you see this all the time. They're usually called paradigm shifts or paradigm battles. And an example would be the paradigm that the Earth was fixed and doesn't move, and the shape of the Earth and everything has always been that way. And then plate tectonics came in, and it was poo-pooed and dismissed, and it was a big paradigm fight until eventually the solid earthers kind of died off, and the plate tectonics people came up with more evidence and things, and that paradigm took over. Well, that's the way science should work. The problem in ideological battles like global warming, again, is not their intentions or not their, even necessarily that there could be some truth to it or some reality to what they're saying. It's that they ultimately want to grow government power to force you to do things based on their beliefs. That's the problem. And like for someone like you should feel free to do something like avoid using too much or giving off too much CO2 or whatever it is, because you think that's a good thing for the planet. Fine, you should do that, but don't force other people to do it because
Totally agree.
of what you believe in. It's just like people with religious beliefs that are certain that this is the best for the world, but that's fine as long as they don't force them on somebody else.
Bill, would you mind if I cut in for
Yes,
you?
I would.
I'm sorry.
The question I wanted to say was on conspiracy. The government can't keep a secret. The Lusitania, that was 1917, and that was kept a secret until the manifest was revealed here about,
Right.
8 years ago. So in terms of government being able to keep a secret, certainly 100 years, I think, would count as a secret, and a lot of people knew that there were armaments on the Lusitania.
Right.
But they managed to keep that out of the public discourse for over 100 years. So I think that your premise that the government can't keep a secret for 100 years out of the public discourse, that's a counterexample for it.
Well, yeah, I was aware of that long before 10 years ago. So it wasn't really 100 years that wasn't
when
known.
the manifest release? I don't remember that.
Well, I had heard, or I knew that was the case. But, you know, I generally agree with you. It's not impossible for the government to keep something hidden for some period of time, but ultimately things get out.
Some fellows have done studies where they've determined that a lot of these government conspiracies are too big to not fail. That they've gone in and they've looked at a situation and they've said, well, taking all this into account, it looks like there would have to be 411,000 people involved in keeping the fake moon landing a secret. And over this period of time, you know, the logistics of this and the secrecy, how is that not going to come out? The conspiracy that the government is hiding effective cancer treatments would involve, they say, 713,000 people. So these are just, the idea is it's just implausible from a logistics and secrecy angle.
Another one was the Pearl Harbor was allowed to happen, was known to happen, it was allowed to happen in order to go after Japan. It just isn't generally plausible, but there may be specific.
Well, Herbert Hoover had something to say about that one too. So, you know, there's plenty of other evidence. It's kind of a question of which stuff do you want to look at. And
What did Hoover say?
you know, a conspiracy theorist, some group of people did something. They got together to come up with something that we would think was harmful. And there's a theory about it. So somebody has to come up with a theory that this group of people did something harmful. And so by that definition of a conspiracy theorist, you see something that happened, something bad happened, like 9/11 or JFK's assassination, or Trump got wiretapped, and so you say, okay, something bad happened, or there's an allegation that Trump got wiretapped, and everybody says, oh no, that's just a conspiracy theory. So people that go and look at what might have happened bad and try to come up with a theory for it, and then look for evidence of that theory, those are called police detectives. Every police detective is a conspiracy theorist. That's what I wanted to say.
Well,
Ralph, you can go ahead and get in
There is some aspect to that. I've been in big debates about 9/11 type stuff. It gets into forensics and like accusing someone of murder or something. You know, it's one thing to say, I think you murdered so-and-so, and it's another to say, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory.
Yeah,
but
you have to be a conspiracy theorist to solve a murder.
But most people who are into conspiracy theories aren't interested in really what happened.
I disagree with that. And in fact, if you look at the allegation that conspiracy, you said the science of belief in conspiracies, who tends to do that is not well established. And the science of people that happen to believe everything they're told is also not well established.
No, but the point is that people are basing their thinking or their whatever on their beliefs.
I'm not basing my thinking on that. I'm a conspiracy theorist. I know something bad happened. I don't know who was behind 9/11. I don't know how Building 7 came down. but I've studied a lot about how buildings fall down. I've got the architects and engineers thing about how no building like Building 7 has ever fallen down except for by human-caused demolition. And somehow we have a Building 7 down, so it's still an open question. I don't know who did it. I'm pretty sure that the government conspiracy theory, which is they said something bad happened and they told us it was the 19 guys with the box cutters, and that was their theory, but their evidence is weak. So by disagreeing with their evidence, sure, I'm a conspiracy theorist, just like every police detective. Everybody that wants to know what's going on in the world has to say, gee, I have a theory, can I test it with facts? I think everybody should be a conspiracy theorist to that extent.
Well, there's a wide range of conspiracy theories, from plausible to totally nuts. So, yes,
You can find your
there's
straw.
Iran-Contra,
There's plenty of
there's
them.
Watergate conspiracies, but it's a matter of what we've been discussing today, the potentially harmful ones that create an alternate reality, is the ones that do not look at the large picture but take out anomalies and then have confirmation bias
The
about
anomaly
these
of
things.
a little black spot in the shadow, a little red dot in the back, when you shine a light and there's a shadow and there's a circle and there's a little red dot in the back of it from a laser light coming in around a circle, and how does a little red dot get in there? That's an anomaly. It should be in the shadow. Why is it there? Those anomalies, and that's a little bitty red dot. It's a little bitty anomaly. But that changed how you think about that. That's like the main evidence for the particle versus wave theory of matter. That little anomaly, any anomaly that doesn't fit with the theory, needs to get followed up. It's like Columbo. Oh, I'm just worried about this one little thing. How did you know that? How many times you watch a Columbo episode, a nice police detective finds an anomaly and says, wait, that doesn't fit with what I'm being told here, and tries to find out what really happened.
Maris, you're next, but can I delay you for 30 seconds so I can switch? This is the standard stuff here. We will return in roughly 30 seconds.
I have a question for Scott.
Yes.
So, is there any religion other than certain types of Buddhism? Is there any religion that you do not consider to be a conspiracy theory? I'm thinking of Islam, Christianity,
Right.
Judaism, and Hinduism.
Right. Well, I tried to make the distinction that I don't consider those conspiracies, but they fall into the same general category because they're based on belief.
Right.
And they're immune to rational argument, evidence, anything else. They're based on belief, and it makes the person feel emotionally complete to believe that.
So
And that's what the comparison is to people who believe in conspiracies as an explanation, because it fits their thinking, or it makes
Yeah,
them feel
so-
better or something like that,
so
and
do
it's
they-
immune, as
So do
you
they
heard,
all
it's
fall-
immune to evidence and rational discussion,
Right. So
like
are they
religion.
are they all conspiracy
No,
theories?
they're all belief based.
Makes them prone to being
Well, how,
conspiracy
in what way are
theorist
they not
believers.
conspiracy theories?
Well, I'm defining conspiracy theory as limited as to a group of two or more, a relatively small group of people getting together, plotting something, carrying it out, and then not being known that they carried that out or they did that.
That's a very narrow
Yes.
definition.
Yes, and that's why I gave the different categories. That's not global warming, for example. That's not a conspiracy in the sense that I'm using the term. And that's another point I made, is there's a lot of words that are thrown around, like fake and lying and denier and stuff like this, that, you know, they're not defining their terms of what they're talking about.
So I guess I've misunderstood most of what's gone on, because I was under the impression that global warming, anthropogenic global warming, is considered a conspiracy theory.
Not, again, in the sense that I was defining it and trying to make a point of distinguishing between them, because, and the reason is that the people behind global warming, AGW, anthropogenic global warming, they really believe in it, much like religious people believe in it. It's not really science-based, it's belief-based.
Right.
And so they're, in a sense, telling the truth because they believe that. Whereas someone that's in a conspiracy theory that actually carried out something would be lying, saying they didn't do it or they had nothing to do with it or whatever. It's the difference between a small group, and the point was made that's more than one person, conspiring to carry something out and then not being found out about it or denying that they had anything to do with it. So it's a very limited, and that's why I made the point. There's really only a few, like the Kennedy assassination and death of Princess Di and things like that, where it would fit into that definition. But philosophically, I think there's a relation to people who need to believe things, and it's sort of like conspiracy theories, because I view them as a form of belief rather than science, evidence-based.
Maris, are you done? Okay, so it's going to be Ralph, Keegan. Anybody else want to speak?
Thought you had me in the original rotation there, Ralph.
Oh, I blew it.
He does.
Okay, Drew, you're next, and then Ralph, and then Keegan.
It's not you, it's him.
Oh.
Okay, and please get the microphone, either yell or get the microphone closer to you.
Nobody has much difficulty hearing me. From what I've heard, they've always told me they hear me.
No, this
they'd
is
like to
being
hear less of
recorded.
me.
Yeah, it's on the microphone there.
Yes, and I'm presuming that with the microphone. I wanted to first mention that I was Googling fluoride as you were speaking, Linda, and the second, what do you call that, return? The second return on Google is the dangers, and apparently the Chinese are behind it. And that's why, even in spite of the documentary that we had, Dr. Strangelove, that describes the Ruskies as being behind it, the Chinese apparently are. But in pursuit of trying to figure out what are the legitimate and illegitimate conspiracies, did you bump into anything, Scott, that would say, as we were discussing how many people were involved in the moon program, or how many participants there would have to be for something to be discovered and validated or parsed out, or and also back to the propensity, I guess, of those people likely to believe certain conspiracies. Did you get a feel for, is there any hope? Is there any ability to say that this is going to be obvious and we're going to find out about this, it'll be overturned, but in the meantime 2 million people are going to believe it because of this?
If I can interrupt for just a second, Nicole has been our server today. Very efficient.
Thank you.
It's again, it's kind of like people should believe whatever they want to believe, and you're not gonna get around that.
Are you saying will or should?
No, well, I guess both in a sense. I don't care if you believe one of these, even flat Earth or something. I don't really care. But if you go around saying, I have scientific proof that the Earth is flat, or I'm going to use the government to force everybody to treat the earth as if it's flat, or, you know, something that impacts me, then we've got a problem.
As in, I heard this morning or yesterday about the yellow fever epidemic in New Orleans, that the rumor, I guess you would call it, was promulgated that blacks were immune. This was pre-slavery, that blacks were immune from yellow fever, which would have a detrimental effect on society. So would you then continue to say that we should be able to believe what we want to believe?
Well, again,
in
people
view of
are
Linda's
going to do
description
that.
of public health.
People are going to do that regardless of what you do.
They will, but should they? And should we work to contain it or expose it or debate it or discuss it, or do we just throw up our hands and say this is the way we are?
Well, again, the answer to me, being science-based, is to try to use science to either know it because we already have the evidence, or figure it out, or do more testing or whatever to establish it, rather than the strength of your belief. See, again, it's like religion.
We can't pay those people, because then they would believe what they were being paid to believe.
Well, you can get into problems in science.
Yeah,
It's not.
it is
not
tricky.
immune from. I think I mentioned that it's not immune from confirmation bias.
It is.
That's what
How
paradigm.
do we work with that then?
Yeah,
I got
it's
it.
tough.
I got it.
Well,
It's
the
hard.
most
I got the
serious.
conspiracy answer.
Okay.
Look, that's why they're doing the chemtrails. That's why they're doing the fluoride, is so that us, and that's why they're putting this the suppressants, the antidepressants in the water, is to get us people that are curious to be less
To
curious.
stop asking those annoying
The really
questions.
important thing is to stop people being curious.
That's the important thing.
So they're working on a general drug solution to your suggestion.
Okay. All
So
right. I feel better
it's
already.
being worked.
Well, the conspiracy theories about vaccines has proven to be very expensive and deadly. Europe right now, much of Europe is experiencing a serious measles outbreak, 40,000 cases, numerous dead, mainly because they've swallowed the nonsense that Andrew Wakefield discovered. Vaccines cause autism. In the United States here, most states have regulations where you cannot send your children to public school if they're not vaccinated.
But that's government interference in our free constitutional liberties, isn't it?
No, because it has a larger benefit to others.
But it's still a violation of our constitutional liberties to do what the fuck we feel like.
Well,
there's an awful lot of things that would fall into that category if you think about it.
Well, other children in school who've been vaccinated but don't have an adequate immune response, or can't be vaccinated, those unvaccinated children are putting those children at risk. And do those children have the rights to be protected against potentially deadly childhood diseases?
You make kind of a point there.
Good way to put it.
Okay, do you wish to be recognized after Ralph, Keegan, and Blake? Okay, Maris. So Ralph is next, and that would be me. I'm going to tell a short story. Back in 1994, I bought a house near Chautauqua, and the previous owner was a man by the name of Stephen Schneider. Anybody know who he is? No, he's a world-famous climatologist who wrote an article somewhere saying climatologists need to be alarmists because the consequences of us being right are so much worse than the consequences of us being wrong.
That's called the precautionary theory.
That would be, he was the
Principle.
primary proponent of the
Precautionary
precautionary
problem.
proposition. Okay, that's where I wanted to jump in before you, Bill. Keegan.
That's good.
Question. So what does teleological mean?
Teleological?
Yeah, teleological. I've never heard that word before.
Teleological thinking is a way of viewing the world that everything happens for a reason.
Well, I was specifically the word teleological.
It's structure. Everything has a structure behind it. It's structured thinking rather than
I
free
don't know the.
or
It's
Google
a
it,
philosophical
someone.
term. It comes out of eons of philosophy. I think you're digging around back in ancient Greek to try and pull that out.
I think is ours is Greek, there's Latin. I think it's like the end or the
Yeah.
object.
Mhm. Do you like telomeres?
Yeah.
Telomeres or telomeres or one of those T words.
I compared it to protocol thinking, which I see all the time. It's thinking there must be a structure, there must be an organization here. I just have to describe it, or I have to figure it out, or something. Whereas, like decentralized decision making, like in evolution, there is no teleological structure behind it. There's some principles like survival of the fittest, but there aren't any. There's no structure behind it. It could go whatever way. So that's the best I can come.
We have Blake and Maris.
So I have a quick comment. I'm not sure this fits our discussion, but a moment ago somebody said something that got me thinking about an old definition that I had for prejudice, and I found it online, and this is the same thing I've always grown up with. It's an unfavorable opinion or feeling formed beforehand or without knowledge, thought, or reason. So are we talking about, in these conspiracies, people's prejudices? Not racial prejudices, but they just have a prejudice, and like with your Thomas Sowell
Well,
quote?
that's what confirmation bias is to some extent. I hadn't thought of the term prejudice, but it's certainly
In that
related.
limited definition.
Yeah, it's certainly related. Yeah, I mean, that's what racism really is prejudging somebody based on their supposed race. I'll have to think about that one some more. Linda, did you have anything on that?
No, you covered it. The problem is prejudice has a negative connotation these days. But
Because we think of it in the terms of racial prejudice.
Right.
But prejudice is just, I
Prejudging.
can't remember where I saw it, like
You
12
should be
years old.
open-minded.
I saw it as, this is something you just don't have knowledge about, okay? So I can be prejudiced against a person because I don't know them. And once I get to know them and I have a rational way of looking at them, I lose my prejudice.
Actually,
It's just an
Daniel
unexamined fact.
Daniel Kahneman addresses that in Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, in terms of how your brain, the summation of your brain with the frontal cortex and all the other parts, pulls together to give you an immediate working assumption of the world.
And you couldn't function without it.
And you couldn't function without it, but you can turn it to bad purposes like everything else.
Did you read the whole book?
Pardon?
Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, did you read the whole book?
I can barely hear you, Bill, and if I can't hear you, people at home can't.
Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, fascinating book. I just had wondered if you'd read the whole thing. I've made it about halfway through.
I've only read the parts I like.
That's not prejudicial at all.
No, that's sufficient.
lucked out.
Blake, are you finished?
Yes, thank you.
Maris, you're up.
Two things. Prejudice can be used to mean favoritism.
Yes.
So, in that sense, I am prejudiced in favor of pit bull terriers. That doesn't mean that I don't love all dogs, but I'm just giving an example of how prejudice can be expanded to a more positive use. So my question is, you said something about a percentage of Muslims, or was it a percentage of Arabs? A percentage of Arabs and who don't believe that Arabs were involved with 9/11. What was that percentage you gave?
4/5, I think.
4/5.
4/5. Where did you get that information?
I believe I picked it up in a book about conspiracy theories. It might have been called Down the Rabbit Hole.
I question that. I
I
question that
do too,
percentage.
because there was no attribution to it, and that all of Arabs, I mean, I don't.
4/5 is pretty high.
I only say that was hearsay.
Okay, that's
That was hearsay.
Good solid
called-
hearsay, though.
Good, yeah.
hearsay.
From a skeptic, but I'd check that one out.
But if that was presented as fact, then that would be an example of fake news.
Well, I heard it
She
presented.
might really believe
I heard
it,
it
but-
presented as fact when she
Yeah.
was listing all of these various things. It was said in an unquestioning manner.
Well, when you look back at a lot of things, you'll find they're a lot fuzzier than they're described, because the person describing them needs to look as if they know what they're talking about, like newspapers and so on. And so, they don't stop and say, where did I get that, or how do I define that term, or any of that stuff. So that's one of the reasons I like to read stuff rather than hear a podcast or a TV news or something like that, because if you write it down, at least somebody's had time to think it out and write it down, and you can pin them a little better than somebody who's trying to entertain and go off on a subject like on a podcast or a talk show or something like that. That's really the worst way to get information, in my opinion.
Anybody else? Drew, you brought up some fairly interesting issues. One of them is society at large wants you to vaccinate your kids, wants you to drink fluorinated water.
Government, which should be us, but isn't us, and we haven't
And there
really
is no
talked
such
about
thing
that.
as
But you're
society.
right. They come at us from Linda's public health approach and say you have to have herd immunity or we're all going to die.
Okay. What I would like to do, Drew, if you would not mind, is have you, and I'm proposing this to you, have you do a session on where herd immunity, the welfare of the vast majority trumps or does not trump the right of the individual to do things. Now, in terms of fluoridation, nobody's stopping, and I'm putting you in air quotes, from drinking water that has had no fluoride added to it.
In a plastic bottle, which
In
we
a
need in
pla-
the Pacific anyway.
Pardon?
Which we need out in the Pacific anyway.
Absolutely.
To keep the gyres
or
identified.
filtering your water.
Yeah.
Or filtering the water.
I spend $100 a year on having a filter that removes fluoride.
Okay.
You're talking about people who can afford it.
And this is exactly the issue of where libertarianism has some issues, if you will. And I'd like to explore those issues. Drew, would you like to do a session on those issues?
I would love to if I thought I could even remotely come up with an answer, but the premise
Yeah,
I
I'm not
think is flawed.
asking you to come up with an answer. I'm asking you to come up with the questions.
I can come up with a solution instead of the question, and that is that government becomes us, so that we quit freaking out about government doing stuff to us if we have the powers of lever in our own hands to be government, and open, transparent, authentic government representation of what you believe in, what they believe in, what we all individually believe in, instead of filtering it through people who are going to make slimy, pandering
But
promises to us.
Fluoridation
What if I don't believe in majority rule?
Then you get to vote against majority rule.
But
And
fluoridation.
And then who makes the decision? These are the issues I want to do
Right.
in a session, not to now because it's late.
It is
Okay?
late, yes.
But I think it's worthy of an entire session on these issues. When does do the values of however you constitute a ruling class, whether it be a majority or a king or a prince or a representative government, when does that override the values of and privileges of an individual? I'd like to have you lead that session, do a PowerPoint presentation
And I'd
on
love
the
to.
issues and not on the answers.
I would love to if I were smart enough to do that. I'm not, because I don't agree with the premise. I don't know that there's an ability to parse that out. I am a zealot on political process. I'm sort of bummed that I missed your ranked preference voting discussions. As you could tell from my email, that is part of my political process zealotry. So I'm happy to argue on that behalf, but in terms of what legitimizes any particular aspect of where legitimate control comes from, I think it comes from the purview of those that are governed, always.
And that's what's
incessantly.
happening with fluoridation. It's up to communities, and they've been voting yay or nay on whether the community keeps
And they're
it.
entitled to do that as long as they have a fluid and adjustable political process to go, holy shit, wasn't that stupid, we need to undo that, instead of doing flip-flopping with different political tribes.
Is there anybody here who would like to lead a session on this issue?
I'd love to, I don't have time. But I will see if I can do some research.
I'll help you.
Would you?
Yeah.
Okay.
'Cause I have
I'll
some-
give you my email.
I have some thoughts.
This is a core libertarian issue.
Yeah,
how
it is.
how,
And
how
I
to
have strong
balance.
feelings on it, yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
No, it is.
and should there even be a balance between the right of the individual to be free from government control?
Excellent question.
Okay, and I don't have an answer to that. Jerry,
If it's in the Constitution, yes.
that makes you a constitutionalist rather than a libertarian.
No,
Jerry,
I nominate Linda.
Jerry, and speak up loudly.
Let me ask if,
Get the microphone close to your
as
mouth.
I've done before,
Wait, we want this on the record.
isn't the legal arena the one in which we decide if we're potentially harming the whole group or not?
No, that's our backup for when we think we've screwed up and we have a contest, but I'm talking going forward, the political process to say, this is what we want as a group, all the individuals, aggregated individual interests, trying to strip the tribalism out of it and saying, we may be stupid enough to do stupid things, as we've seen that we do, but we have a process to go forward, take an action, and then see that we were stupid and adjust and modify it. And hopefully we get a linear regression to a mean that takes us in a more civilized direction.
That's majority rule.
It is majority rule, and I favor
And
majority rule.
and I
In
do
different
not.
majorities.
Ralph.
Blake, go ahead.
So first of all, I'd like to thank Ideas About Books. One of the reasons I come here is I look for books to read. So Thinking Fast and Slow, I've now got on my list. I've actually downloaded a Kindle version to read. So, and I'm going to get the audiobook version as
You
well.
read that, I look forward to seeing what you find.
Well, it won't be till after the first of the year.
That would be a good discussion, Ralph.
I'm going on a cruise in December, and I'm going to read this book.
Okay.
That'll keep me busy on the cruise. And one thing I'd like your indulgence and your help on. As Bill and I were talking earlier, power doesn't corrupt, power isolates. So if people are not willing to speak truth to power, people in power think they are omnipotent. They might even say, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, you guys would still love me. So,
they could, yes.
and that doesn't mean power corrupts. That simply means that when you're isolated and people don't tell you the truth, you're not going to get enough information. Okay? So in that vein, I'd like your feedback. I have a brochure I'm going to hand out to everybody. I would love to have your critical feedback. Tear it apart, mark it up, and tell me what phrases really don't work. And please let me know. My email's on. Okay?
But I already agree with you all the time.
Are we done?
Okay.
Okay, I think it's time to give Scott and Linda a big hand. They put a lot of work into this. Thank you.
And if you did not donate, I'm not sure we can
Oh,
pay for Scott and Linda's
No, I
lunch,
didn't.
but we really should try.
I didn't order anything.
All right, thank you for going on a diet.
Yeah.